listen to reason? Will you open your eyes?
We got Mike in, is it Dillon, Colorado?
That's correct.
Hi, how you doing?
Hey, doing very well. I had a question. I remember back, maybe even like junior high or high school, they give you the examples for evolution. They're like the peppered moth and the fruit flies, and I forget some of the other ones. But anyway, I kind of remember that, and I didn't really question anything back then. But like a few times since then, I kind of thought of that about like fruit fly evolution, like as evidence for Darwinian evolution. And the other day, I had some free time, and I kind of looked it up, and I could only find like negative things online about it, like why it's not evidence for Darwinian evolution. So I was wondering, is there another side that says it's good evidence for Darwinian evolution?
Okay, I think I kind of have to unpack some language here real quick, and just for clarity, I'm not an expert on fruit fly evolution or evolution in general. I don't have any formal training in these areas. But what I can say is that my understanding is that, you're saying, is fruit fly evolution really an example of Darwinian evolution? Well, of course it is. Evolution is evolution is evolution. It's not like, I don't even know how we can try and draw lines like that.
I see what you're saying, and more specifically the experiments, not just like observing like the ways that fruit flies, like small variations. I'm talking about, the experiment where apparently fruit flies are perfect for this because they reproduce so fast, and so they bombard them with all this radiation, and so you can get hundreds of thousands of years worth of evolution within 10, 20 years worth of experiments of these fruit flies.
Yeah, and so they're good for studying things like they reproduce relatively fast. Their genome has already been mapped. We can we can watch the changes occur. Now, the objections that I tend to see to things like this are people, there are people who will say things like, well, yeah, but you haven't seen a fruit fly turn into a dog. And that's such a misrepresentation of what evolution is about. Evolution, by the way, is a fact. It occurs. It's an observed occurrence, right down to speciation, by the definition of speciation being creatures that can't interbreed.
Well, and even more, the fruit fly experiments are an illustration of this fact.
Now, does it illustrate that? Because with Darwinian evolution, in hundreds of thousands of years, you can get animals that are very different from each other. You can get those differences. So I guess that's the thing that they're pointing out is why don't we see that?
The thing is, there's no guarantee. There's no path. There's no plan. So there's no guarantee that in X amount of time you're going to see X amount of change. And so when you look at things like artificial selection, the breeding of dogs, we get all these dog breeds from wolves, and you get incredible diversity right from Chihuahuas to Great Danes and things like that, in a relatively short amount of time. The time scale for what we're normally talking about when we talk about the evolutionary history of the planet is much, much more vast than that. And so even though we can look at a lot of different generations of fruit flies, we're doing this in a controlled experimental way. So, there's no expectation from the scientists that they're going to keep breeding fruit flies and all of a sudden they're going to get a generation of dragonflies or something like that. That's just not the way it works.
Well, what do you mean it's not the way? That is how it works. Hundreds of thousands of years, you could get something that's not too different, a dragonfly and a fruit fly. That is how it works, right?
The fact that it's possible within X number of generations to see this sort of change doesn't mean that you're going to see that kind of change in every species genome. It doesn't mean that you're going to see that change in every experiment that you do. You pointed out the reason we use fruit flies is because they reproduce rather quickly and abundantly, and their genome's mapped, and we can track these changes. But to have an expectation that because of this, we can do kind of, super rapid, massive species change is, I think, absurd, because the one thing you have to realize is that, yeah, fruit flies, they reproduce really quickly, but they've been doing that for a really, really, really long time on their own.
Yeah.
So, you know, the fact that, you know, in the few years, a few decades that we've been doing research on this, we haven't produced incredible, massive changes. It isn't an argument against evolution. It's exactly what we'd expect. We're looking at very small changes in the genome. The fruit flies are good because we're able to see drift by generation, and that may vary between species.
Well, let me give you an example. There's actually a research article published. I believe it was actually in Science magazine, or maybe it was another source. I don't know. But anyway, I was reading this recently. It was just published a couple of years ago, and it was about a change that occurred in fruit flies. It was an evolutionary change, and it actually had nothing to do with genes. What happened, or at least only peripherally related to genes. Fruit flies are subject to parasitic infections. In this one species of fruit fly, they get this parasitic worm that inhabits the host body, swells up, releases larvae, and it doesn't kill the fruit fly, but the fruit fly doesn't have the energy to reproduce. And so obviously that's, you know, there's no path to future generations in that case. What's happened is that some fruit flies have become susceptible to a bacterial infection that normally protects aphids from parasitic infections. So what we have is some kind of probably genetic vulnerability to a bacterial infection that also now protects the fruit flies. And so what's happening is that the fruit flies who have this, who are susceptible to this bacterial infection, are now more successful at reproduction than fruit flies that aren't. And so what we're seeing is a very rapid evolution in fruit fly populations. So there's an example of evolution. It is occurring.
Yeah. See, I'm not sure that's, I mean, you got fruit flies, and they changed a little bit, and you end with fruit flies. I mean, I don't think anybody would deny that. I don't see...
Well, that's good, because biologists are looking at that saying, yep, that's evolution in action.
Okay, but how is that evidence for Darwinian evolution? Like,
what do you mean by Darwinian evolution?
Go ahead.
What do you mean by Darwinian evolution?
Yeah, I mean, like, we all share a common ancestor, like, not just
right.
Oh, okay.
speciation.
Oh, well.
Okay. The fruit fly experiments are an opportunity to look at changes in the genome. But as I pointed out, it doesn't matter that they're reproducing faster, that you're seeing a raw number of change in a difference in the number of generations between fruit flies than, for example, humans. You can look at many generations of fruit flies within a generation of humans. You are looking at it as, hey, wait a minute, we still haven't produced anything with fruit flies. Guess what? We will never produce anything that isn't considered a fruit fly, because it's always going to be a descendant of a fruit fly. Just like we're still apes. When you look at it, I don't know why you would look at fruit fly evolution and say, is this confirmation of this broader idea of speciation? Well, first of all, it's not the only point of data that we have. Common ancestry has been confirmed not just through the fossil record, but through DNA evidence. And even, we've mentioned it before, but Francis Collins, who's an evangelical Christian and former head of the Human Genome Project, said that even if there wasn't any fossil evidence, the DNA evidence alone would be enough to confirm common ancestry with the other apes. And we've looked at the fusion of chromosome 2, so we know, to the extent that we know anything, we know that we share a common ancestor with the other great apes on the planet. And this idea tracing back that all life originates from one tiny population, I don't know, it's a bit of an inference, I would say, because you have the ability to compare the DNA of all living things on the planet. It's all interrelated. And then you have the fossil record, which actually supports all of that. And so I don't know why anyone would look at fruit flies and say, oh, they're still producing fruit flies, so that can't be evidence for evolution. What it is it's evidence for, or it's a way to test and observe the change in genetic code over generations. Now, over generations is different from over time and between or through the process of speciation. But fruit flies have actually, I'm pretty sure, there's 3,000 different described species of fruit flies, and I'm pretty sure that in the process of observing them, we have new species. They still get classified as fruit flies, but they're now different species. And if you begin breeding them off of there, you could see changes, but you don't necessarily know what potential changes there can be beginning with a fruit fly genome.
Okay, so I mean, you're kind of saying that with Darwinian evolution, over hundreds of thousands of years, you can get, it result in vastly different animals. But with fly evolution, we should not expect to see, with the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of years, vastly different animals.
I'm not saying hundreds of thousands of years. You're saying hundreds of thousands of years. We're talking about millions of years. But yes, the fact that fruit fly... what's a good analogy for this?
Well,
I think I see where you're going. I mean, you could say that. You could say, look, it takes millions of years to get differences. Fruit fly evolution has only accounted for hundreds of thousands of years. So, I mean, is that what you're saying?
The point, no. I'm not just comparing the fact. Okay, there is the idea that, let's say, one of them runs faster, but they're running faster in the same grand scope as those of us who are running slower. So clearly, they change much more slowly, or there's a decrease in the amount.
They adapt to selection pressure, or they respond to selection pressure faster because they have a faster reproductive rate.
Well, if they adapt to that faster,
you're looking at it.
Even more evidence. I mean, you wouldn't want to say that. That would hurt your case, right?
No.
No. Why would it hurt my case? It's a fact. Fruit flies, animals that reproduce at a faster rate, can respond to selection pressure as a species faster than animals that reproduce at a slower rate. That is a fact.
Yes, I agree.
Okay.
Yeah, well, because you could say, if let's say they just, for some reason, it's just a scientific fact that fruit flies just, they respond to these things super slow, then you could say, well, that's why. It's because fruit flies just respond real slow, so you wouldn't expect to see big changes.
Sure.
Okay.
And yet what you're saying, no, what you're saying is that we're not seeing big changes, therefore this is a problem for Darwinian evolution. And what we're saying is, no, it's not a problem for Darwinian evolution, because Darwinian evolution doesn't say that in this number of generations of fruit flies you should expect big changes.
The Darwinian evolution doesn't say that in hundreds and thousands of years worth of evolution.
No,
it doesn't.
No. This isn't hundreds of thousands of years worth of evolution.
Huh? What is it?
The fact that fruit flies reproduce and have multiple generations in the space of one of our generations doesn't mean that they've gone through hundreds of thousands of years of evolution. They've still gone through the same number of years. There are just more generations.
Yeah, it's the equivalent of 100, because they blast them with the radiation themselves. They don't just like sit them around and watch them, for like 1 year per 1 year. So it's 100,000 years worth of evolution.
No, it's
Wow.
generations. But all that aside, is it your contention that that we should see fruit flies evolving into something else?
Yeah, if you give them the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of years worth of evolution, yes.
No, you don't understand how evolution works. That's
just from the article.
No. What's the selection?
It's not.
What is the selection pressure that's driving them to evolve?
The ones in the experiments?
Yeah.
With the selection pressure. Well, I mean, they pick the ones. I mean, they can like selectively make them based on the mutations that they get.
Okay. So
yeah.
So you can artificially select how they interact and therefore drive selection of specific traits. Okay. And this can result in a speciation event. So you get two species of fruit flies that cannot interbreed. Right?
Okay.
Okay. Nature can do the same thing.
Yes.
Okay. That's evolution.
That's it. That's your case. Right?
That's
No,
that's a basic mechanism
Stop.
of evolution.
Stop.
How can you not understand this?
No, yeah, I understand that. I mean, but
No.
the hundreds of thousands of years, that's not just like a creationist website.
Stop with the
Stop.
100,000 of years.
First of all, how dare you say that's it? That's your case for evolution? No, sir. The case for evolution is much, much broader than that. I didn't
within
actually
my question,
shut
within the fruit fly
up
case.
for a moment. I didn't raise fruit flies and say this is the whole case for evolution. Evolution is a study of life and the changes in life. And the fruit fly experiments that you're talking about study one aspect of this. I also mentioned the fossil evidence, the DNA evidence, etc., and the fact that your understanding of this is fundamentally flawed. That the fact that we can witness, we can observe many, many more generations of fruit flies doesn't mean that we should have expected big changes like you're talking about, like a fruit fly to a dragonfly or a dog or whatever. It's not a predictive process.
Okay, yeah, I didn't mean, when I said case for, I meant case against fruit fly evolution, not case for like the entire thing. Yeah, this is not like a debate over the entire thing of evolution. But let me just say that, I mean, before you cut me off and say I'm not allowed to say this, I mean, that's like the articles from like Science Magazine. They had one that celebrated, there was like a 100-year anniversary, and they were celebrating the fruit fly experiments, talking about how it represented hundreds of thousands of years of evolution. That's not like a creationist nonsense type thing.
Yeah.
Okay, I think you misinterpreted what that said.
Where it said it represented hundreds of thousands of years worth of evolution?
Well, you've latched onto this hundreds of thousands of years without understanding that it represents.
Yeah, it represents hundreds of thousands
That
of
doesn't
years.
mean that in 100,000 years of evolution we're going to get something different.
100,000 years ago? What do you think humans looked like 100,000 years ago?
I think it'd be different.
Okay, how much different?
I 82%.
82% different? Do
Wow.
you realize that we share 96% of our DNA with chimpanzees?
Yeah, but we're more than 4% different than them. I mean, look, this
Actually,
kind
we're
of
not.
evolving
No.
into something else. Yeah, I mean,
okay.
the article said what it said. I'm sorry, you're kind of fighting me on that. I mean, that's not really the gist of my call.
I find
You know
it
what?
hilarious that you can agree that we share 96% of our, and by the way, that number may not be completely accurate, but if you agree that we share 96% of our DNA with chimps, and then you can say that we're more than 4% different. What? What's your criteria for different?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're very much different than apes, or what, chimpanzees, is that what you said?
Sure, and
Okay.
and what? Okay, but if we're
Yeah, I
4%
don't think just
different,
citing that we're 96% similar in DNA, I don't think that necessarily, I mean, I guess in the like in that particular, like in DNA, yes, we are only that much different.
there we go.
Yeah, absolutely.
So where did you come up with that we're 82% different from chimps?
Well, I thought you were talking about like how different are we? Like you didn't say different in the genome. Like how different are we? I think we're very different. And gee, I just made up 82%.
Sure,
You just
sure.
said
What
how
you're
Yes.
doing is coming up with some gut feeling definition of difference and pulling a number out of your ass for it. The fact that you intuitively look at something and say, wow, this is really, really different from this, doesn't have any impact at all on how different it actually is. And when we're talking about the science of evolution, the science of genetics, there's a criteria, there's an established measurement, essentially, for how different we are. And so what difference does it make if to you intuitively we seem 82% different?
Okay, so you went down the road with animals 96%. So what does that have to do with my question?
Well, since your question was about fruit fly evolution, I guess not a lot.
Okay, well, I mean,
What
yeah,
does your question have to do with evolution?
Well, my question was, how does the fruit fly experiments demonstrate Darwinian evolution? So
Sure,
how does a lot to do with
it
evolution?
demonstrates it by being able to observe changes in the genome over generations at a rate that we cannot necessarily observe in other species. That's
But you would also experience that if there weren't Darwinian evolution, so that's not really evidence.
no.
What?
If Darwinian evolution isn't true, then you wouldn't have the genetic variation over generations to observe. Darwinian
If
evolution is...
evolution is not true, then you would not have genetic variations. You wouldn't have some flies with big wings and some with small. That's not true.
No. You're looking at the in species and saying there would be no variation. I fully agree. I fully admit that if Darwinian evolution isn't true, that it might be possible for there to be a universe where there are different creatures. However, However, what we're talking about is we are observing genetic changes over generations. That is evolution by definition.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. That's why I always specify Darwinian evolution.
There is only evolution. What is Darwinian evolution? Why is that different from evolution?
Well, you can have speciation as evolution. I mean, you got like strong fruit flies would be more likely to produce stronger fruit flies. That's evolution. That's speciation.
Yep.
But that's not Darwinian evolution.
Why not?
What's Darwinian evolution?
Because Darwinian evolution is like we all came from the same ancestor, like humans.
It's the same thing.
That's
Yes,
totally
common descent is one of the pillars of evolution.
Same thing.
It's not the same thing because you could have one without the other, so it's not
Well,
the same
okay.
thing.
The actual scientists say it's the same thing.
So if without Darwinian evolution, you couldn't even have speciation. You couldn't have variation in species.
I don't know why you keep saying Darwinian evolution, but yes.
So without Darwinian evolution, but they knew about speciation before they knew about Darwinian evolution. So
Well, you know what? They knew that things fell down before we learned about gravity. What difference does that make?
Well, gravity is things falling down. That's not really a good example.
No, that's actually not what gravity is.
We're done.
But, thank you.